I was staying at a cabin in Canada. It's a family-owned lodge, nothing too big or fancy, just something my grandparents built and kept up with. Every now and again, someone in the family would enjoy a getaway there. This was just after the new year. I planned to stay 3 nights at the cabin. It was out in the middle of nowhere on some off-the-grid property that I had to get to by snowmobile, which was normal around this time of year. When I got there, I fired up the wood heater and set up my stuff in the bedroom. Within just 30 minutes, I started to feel the sense of relief that I was hoping for. Time seemed to move slower out here, and there was nothing to crowd my mind. I could just lay back and enjoy the peace and quiet. The rest of that day and night was nice. I got up in the morning at sunrise, making breakfast on top of the wood stove. Then I bundled up to head outside and grab more wood. When I opened the front door, I was taken aback. There were footprints in the snow, coming right up to the cabin. I immediately stepped outside and looked around. Then I followed them for a while. They led into the woods, with no signs of going toward the road, which was several miles away. How could they be way out here and not have taken a snowmobile? And why were they out here to begin with? I was really confused, especially knowing they had to have come up to the cabin in the middle of the night. Otherwise, I would have heard them in the morning. I got wood from the shed and brought it inside. I debated leaving, but I figured if they came by and didn't do anything, then it must have been an accident. Not to mention how much of a hassle it was to get to and from the cabin. Leaving now would have made this trip a huge waste. I sat by the fire and kept a lookout for the next couple of hours. I didn't see anything. As the sun got higher and the temperature got warmer, I threw my jacket back on and decided to go for a walk in the woods to pass the time. I figured I might as well take the opportunity to see if the footprints led anywhere. Maybe I'd find another cabin or something, which would put my mind at ease. I followed them into the woods. I walked for probably 20 minutes, not passing any signs of anything. It was just one continuous trail of prints in the snow, going through the woods, until I suddenly heard something ahead of me. I whipped my head up and looked ahead. It was suddenly quiet, and everything was still, just endless trees and snow. I knew what I heard was the crunch of a footstep. There was no mistaking it. I felt goosebumps all over my body. Someone was out there, hiding behind one of the trees. They had probably just noticed me and quickly hid, maybe 10 or 15 feet from where I was. Hello? Is someone out there? There was no response, not even the slightest sound. As the tension grew, I felt like I had to do something. I decided to turn around and run back to the cabin. I packed everything as quickly as I could, locked up the cabin, and took the snowmobile back to the road. I don't know what happened at that cabin or what was going to happen, but I have no doubt that the person in the woods was the same one who came by in the middle of the night. Them being on the way back to my cabin only shows that it was no accident. I haven't been back to the cabin after that. Every year, around the end of February, my good friend Justin and I take a camping trip to the same place. We both do a lot of backpacking and camping, but there is always something different and special about camping in a snowy forest. With the right gear, it isn't all that unsafe either. This year, we got there, set up our tents, built a campfire, and enjoyed a couple of drinks around the flames. It wasn't long after we arrived that we suddenly heard something horrifying. A dark scream echoed across the landscape in the distance. It only lasted a few seconds, then everything went silent again. Both of us jumped up from our chairs, startled. It sounded too far away for us to have any chance of seeing who or what it was, but we looked in that direction anyway. Justin seemed to think it had to be an animal making an eerily human sound, because there was no way someone else was out here. I was pretty sure it had to be a person. Either way, we didn't really know what to do about it other than wait and see if we heard it again. A while passed and nothing else happened. The sun started to set and the temperature dropped. We grabbed more wood for the fire and made some food. Then, out of nowhere, that scream sounded again. This time it was closer, maybe only 200 feet away from our camp. Justin and I looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. We should probably check it out before the sun was fully set. I grabbed my knife, just in case, and we both bundled up before heading into the woods. We tried to walk cautiously, unsure of what exactly we were walking up on. We had maybe gotten 150 feet out when we heard it again, this time almost right next to us. I stopped and stared in that direction, but there was nothing there. I glanced at Justin, and he looked just as worried as I was. We must have stood still and waited there for nearly 5 minutes before Justin slowly started stepping forward again. He passed a few trees, then suddenly stopped. I could sense the fear in his body language. I stepped up next to him and almost threw up. There was a deer carcass lying in the snow, definitely having been put down recently. Then, I felt Justin's hand tap my shoulder. I lifted my gaze, and standing across the forest was a person. He was just standing there, wearing hardly any winter clothing, watching us. Almost like he was observing us. Justin tapped my shoulder harder, and I understood what he meant. Both of us turned and hurried back to our camp. We didn't even speak as we packed our things in a rush and got out of the area. I don't think there's an explanation for what we saw, or who that was out there, or even if that was the person we heard screaming. After that, we stopped going to our usual camping spot and settled on a different area, hoping to never come across something like that again. It was the day before Christmas Eve. I had hopped in my car to do a few DoorDash deliveries, hoping the holiday season would bring in some better tips. It was around 11 p.m. when I got this order. It was a normal one, just a bag of food to drop off at a house. Most of my previous orders had actually been grocery deliveries, probably because stores were closing up for the next 2 days. The address on this one was far farther than I'd usually be willing to drive, but with not many other orders coming through, I took it anyway. It was lightly snowing outside, and the roads were very quiet, making the drive peaceful. But the house wasn't in an average neighborhood. When I pulled up to what I thought was going to be the entrance to a residential area, I found instead a thin path through the trees, leading to a small, cabin-like home at the end. I pulled down the path and parked, getting out with the food. I walked up to the door and gave it a few knocks. Inside, I could hear chatter like a group of people laughing and talking over each other. It sounded like so many people that I was actually confused about how they could all fit in such a small cabin. There was also something strange about the way it sounded, something that just didn't seem right. Something was off. Then the door opened. A man stood in front of me, and the contrast to what I had expected put me off for a second. The inside of the house was still, motionless. Nobody was running around, and most of the lights weren't even on. And yet, the sound of a huge holiday party was coming from the small room at the end of the hallway. The man smiled at me. "Why don't you come bring the food inside? They'll be happy to see you." That was an odd thing to say. I began stuttering, trying to say no and make up an excuse, but the man interrupted. "They just want to thank you for working during the holidays. You'll be glad you stopped by." All the while he was saying these strange, honestly creepy things, the chatter in the back of the cabin continued until it suddenly cut out. Just like that. Silence. It was like a recording or a tape had stopped playing. The man looked back for a moment, clearly not expecting that to happen. And before he could do anything, I dropped the bag on the porch and ran back to my car. I got in and drove away. I stopped doing deliveries for the night and just stayed home for the rest of the holidays. I know nothing actually happened at that cabin, but it's how disturbingly strange everything was and the thoughts of what could have happened that still freak me out. It was the day after Christmas, and I worked at a small family-owned grocery store as an overnight stocker. I'm not even sure why I was scheduled that night. We had been closed for Christmas, and the store had probably been slow during the day, so there wasn't much for me to do in terms of stocking. I spent the first hour filling what little needed to be restocked on the shelves, but then I just kind of wandered around. As I was walking past the front of the store, I noticed a person outside, unusually close to the building for this time of night. He looked like he was just walking around until he quickly noticed me looking at him. Instead of going away, he came closer to the window. He didn't say anything. He didn't knock. He just stared at me. I felt really uneasy and wasn't sure what to do. After a few seconds of him not looking away, I turned and walked away from the window. I guess I was just trying to play it off like I wasn't bothered. But that was very strange. No normal person acts like that. I waited a few minutes before going back to the front of the store and looking out the window. He was gone. I sighed in relief, then continued walking around the store to pass the time. I was weaving in and out of the aisles, fixing up some of the shelves. Maybe 10 minutes had passed when I rounded the corner at the end of one of the aisles and immediately stopped walking. Several boxes had fallen off the shelf and were scattered on the floor. They weren't small things that could have just tipped over. They had been knocked down or moved by someone. Just as I was trying to process it, I heard something from down the aisle. A soft, deep, eerie laugh, like a man quietly laughing right around the end of the aisle. It almost sounded unnatural, like a grown adult giggling like a child. Part of me thought about going to confront him, but then I remembered the man I had seen by the window. He was fairly big, and he could have had something hidden in his jacket. I ran to the front and out the doors, got in my car, and called the police. They pulled in 10 minutes later. The man inside the store was gone. Later, we reviewed the security tapes. They showed him finding a way in through a side door. And as he hid behind the aisle, laughing at me, he held a knife in his hand, some kind of small switchblade. The cops think he wasn't sober, and I don't disagree, but I also don't think it changes anything. I could have died that night if things had gone any differently. I was never a big party person, but on big nights like these, I almost always got peer pressured into going out. This year, my friend was hosting a party at his place. He was kind of known as the rich friend because he had a big house with land and everything. My buddy Trav picked me up around 9 o'clock, and we drove to the party. There were maybe 20 or 30 people there, nothing too crazy, but enough to get me drinking more than I should have. We played some drinking games, watched the ball drop, and overall, it was a good time. By around 3 a.m., though, I was ready to leave. I found Trav passed out on a bed upstairs. Figuring he, and probably nobody else here, was sober enough to drive, I went outside and ordered an Uber. It said they were 10 minutes away, so I sat down on the curb at the end of the driveway and waited. His house wasn't near any big roads. It was kind of away from everything nice and quiet, which was good for me to relax after a night like that. I just sat there, curled up under my jacket, and waited for the ride. It felt like only 4 or 5 minutes had passed when a car pulled up. Uber, the guy called out. I jumped up and got in, kind of startled by how I'd lost track of time like that. I guess I really was wasted. I got settled in the back seat, and he started driving. The man looked like he was in his 50s, with short dark hair and a thick beard. Big party tonight? He asked. Oh, yeah, I guess so, I responded, though I wasn't much in the mood for small talk. He glanced at me in the mirror. Something about the look he gave me just made me uncomfortable. I really don't know why. At the time, I thought I was just overthinking it. I put my head back and closed my eyes, trying to rest for the remainder of the ride. But only a minute later, my phone dinged. I opened my eyes immediately and made eye contact with the driver in the mirror. He was already looking at me. I awkwardly glanced away and pulled my phone out. My stomach tightened. My face went pale. It was a message from the Uber app. Your driver just arrived at the pickup location, followed by another text from the driver. Hey, where are you? I looked back up at the mirror. The man's eyes were locked on me. I put my phone back in my pocket, leaned my head back, and closed my eyes again. Inside, I was freaking out, terrified, but I tried to play it off like I didn't know anything. 30 seconds later, I felt the car slowing down. When I peeked out the window, I saw we were at an intersection with a red light. As soon as the car stopped, I opened the door and jumped out. Midway through getting out, he started driving. I hit the pavement hard, but I got up and sprinted away. He drove off after that. I don't know who that man was, but he was going around on New Year's night, picking up random drunk people waiting for Ubers. There were so many signs I missed, like the fact that we weren't even going in the direction of my home. I was just too out of it to think straight. Honestly, I never even should have gotten in the car without checking my phone first. Where he would have taken me, and what would have happened, is unknown.